Good morning. Today is the 8th day of the second Adar, the 18th of March, and we're going to be looking at the second reading of Parshat Vayikra. This is a very interesting thing here today about salt. So we're going to be looking at Leviticus 2:11. I'll read it in Hebrew, then in English. וכל קורבן מנחתך במלח תמלח, ולא תשבית מלח ברית אלוקיך מעל מנחתך, על כל קורבנך תקריב מלח. And all your meal offerings you shall salt with salt, and you shall not omit the salt covenant of your God from upon your meal offering. Upon all your offerings you shall offer salt. The role of salt in the temple is very pronounced because it's not just meal offerings that have to be salted, it's actually every single sacrifice was salted. Every piece of meat that was placed on the altar was salted. And it wasn't just salted, it was like caked on with salt. There's a lot of salt used. Luckily, Israel has, the land of Israel has the Dead Sea, which is called in Hebrew the Salt Sea. And it's plenty of salt, nothing lacking there. But everything was caked on with salt. What's the idea of salt? What does it do? We're going to look at two different things today. The first thing we're going to look at is the meaning in Chassidut. In Hasidic thought, salt represents what we call bitterness. It's also a very interesting thing that we usually say that salt is not salty in Hebrew, we say that it's bitter. That's the language that the sages oftentimes use, that the salt is bitter. What is the idea of bitterness and how does it affect us? When a person does something wrong, there are usually two possible options about how they react to having done something wrong, to having sinned or transgressed or just hurt someone or done something that they're not very proud of. The usual response for most people is sadness, being morose, being upset. And if it takes hold strongly in the psyche, it can lead to depression even. There's a story that I many times describe in this context. It's a real story, true story, I heard from the person that it happened to. He was in his early 30s, and he had a friend come over. He himself was married, had 5 children. His friend also was married, had 5 children. And this friend came over from a distant town, and he stayed with him in Jerusalem for a few hours, and then he had to travel back. And he asked my friend to drive him to the central bus station. And my friend says that his license had been revoked for whatever reason, and he couldn't drive him, and he told him, I can't drive you. But this friend of his pleaded with him. He said, if you don't take me now, I'll miss the bus, and I'm going to have to spend the night in Jerusalem. I'm not going to be there with my family. In the end, he agreed. And the worst possible tragedy happened as they were nearing the central bus station. My friend told me he has no idea to this day. No one knows exactly why this happened. His car flipped over, and he came out unscathed. Nothing happened to him, but his friend was killed. And this led him to very deep depression. And he couldn't get over it. He didn't know what to do. He didn't go to the funeral. He never went to see the family. He completely distanced himself from life. He started closing himself off. And there was real fear that he wouldn't come out of it. Eventually, he went to someone, I think I know who it is, but I don't remember 100%, so I won't say it. He went to someone who heard the story, and after a few minutes of thought, told him like this. He said, the fact that your friend had finished his life is a fact. It had nothing to do with you. That was God's decree. We don't understand why one person lives this much and the other person lives that much. We don't understand the meaning of how some people die in one way and some people die in another way. that there was nothing that could prevent. His life was over. But God did a great thing for you. What did He do? He made it so that you would feel responsible for His death. But the point was not for you to feel responsible for Him. His life was over anyway. The point was that you would take responsibility for His family. In other words, He didn't want to leave the 5 orphans without anyone in this world to take care of them. And so He did you a great favor, and He told you, by making it happen this way, that you're now their father for all intents and purposes. And so the fact that you didn't go to the funeral, that was because you were steeped in your own self-morose, your own feeling sorry for yourself. And feeling sorry is the first type of reaction that we have to something that goes wrong, that we feel sorry for ourselves, we feel sad, that leads to depression and so on. And it has a name in the world. This is called guilt feelings. And guilt feelings are literally the work of one's evil inclination. It's the work of the negative side of one's psyche, because it doesn't lead to anything positive. Guilt feelings are the worst possible reaction to anything. Instead of guilt feelings, there is a second possible reaction, which is bitterness. And bitterness is what salt gives. And salt, because of this, is needed on the altar. It's needed on every piece of sacrifice that's put on the altar, because it's what takes out the moroseness. It's what takes out the self-pity, the feelings of guilt. The bitterness takes them out of the blood. And that's the reason that we use salt in order to kosher meat. One of the things that we have to do after the animal is slaughtered, we have to salt it for an amount of time, with in a way that the salt takes out, in some chemical reaction, it takes out part of the blood. And that part of the blood is considered to be the part of the blood that is related to the evil inclination. It's related to our negative side, and it purifies us. So the same thing is true when a person, for instance, feels bad, but then cries, not cries because of feelings of self-pity, but cries in order to get out those feelings. And that type of crying cleanses. And because of that, we say that tears are salty. They have the ability to take out this feeling of self-pity and so on. And then the person is cleansed, and what they feel is a sense of responsibility, meaning that the correct response to sin is responsibility. The worst response to sin is to throw the responsibility somewhere else, or to just feel sorry for oneself, which is to take no responsibility at all. In any case, so that's the first story about salt that we need to know. Nachmanides explains that following the theory of 4 elements, salt is a mixture of elemental water and elemental fire. And salt is extracted from water, especially from the sea of salt, the Dead Sea, while the salt itself burns like fire. Thus, salt is the mixing of the opposites of the traits of loving kindness, that's water, and might, or fear, which is fire. The people of Israel, too, consist of many different shades and even opposites. There is no need to nullify one or the other because they are opposites. Rather, we need to find the salt, as a word, that unites them. That's called a salt covenant, and that's what we have in our verse. You shall not omit the salt covenant. This is a different side of the salt. That salt connects things together. One might say that in the story that I just told, the covenant here, the connection between these 2 men, the one who was killed and the one who then became responsible for his orphans, who took them through their bar mitzvahs and paid for their marriages and so on, that became a covenant. That's a salt covenant. And it happened only after the one who was driving was able to extract from himself the feelings of self-pity. So the salt covenant in our verse also appears in connection with the priestly gifts enumerated in the Torah portion of Korach. It is also mentioned in reference to the rule of the house of David. And it says in 2 Chronicles 13:5, You should know that Avaya, the God of Israel, has given dominion to David over Israel for eternity, for him and his sons, a salt covenant. It's something that is eternal. It bonds things together forever. Thus it is the king, Melech, who acts like the salt, Melach. They're almost the same thing, except that one has a chaf at the end, the other one has a chet, connecting the disparate elements of the people. So turning to our modern understanding of chemistry, salt is a compound made up of sodium and chloride. Sodium's atomic number is 11, chloride's is 17, so we can associate salt with the number 28. Another way of saying this is that every molecule of salt has 28 protons and 28 electrons. Sodium has one extra valence electron, which chloride is missing, right? Missing a valence electron. So sodium thus donates its extra electron to chloride, thus creating an ionic bond. Relatively then, sodium is masculine because it donates its electron, its valence electron, while chloride is feminine because it receives the valence electron from sodium. Amazingly, these numbers are alluded to in the verse from our Parsha, quoted above, in the words, "And you shall not omit the salt covenant of your God from upon your meal offering, v'lo tashbit melech brit elokecha me'al minchatecha." There are exactly 28 letters. So we have here the modern chemical formula for salt, NaCl. These words constitute the strong prohibitive element with regard to salt. Just the first three words, "and you shall not omit the salt," v'lo tashbit melech, have 11 letters, which means that the rest of the phrase has 17 letters. And what do we say? We said the sodium's atomic number is 11, and chloride's is 17. So that's how this verse, or this phrase, actually divides. V'lo tashbit melach, brit elokecha me'al minchatecha is 11 and 17 letters. In addition, in the final positive directive, upon all your offerings you should offer salt. Al kol korbancha takriv melach, there are once again 17 letters. In addition, this entire verse has 17 words, and the previous verse has 11 words. All these are beautiful allusions to the modern chemical composition of salt. Thanks for joining today. We did it in record time, and for some reason. Hope to see you again tomorrow.